Have you ever paid more for something simply because you thought if you paid more for something you'd be getting a better version of that very something? This happens to me all the time on Amazon, right? I'm looking at two products, they are about $2 apart, and I'll either choose to buy the cheaper one because I figure who cares if it breaks, it's just a product that I'm only going to be using for a simple task or purpose, or I figure no, this is an important product, I'd rather spend a couple dollars more to know that I have the best version of that product. Well, when you're making this decision, elaboration likelihood modeling would suggest that you're going through a peripheral route. When we use the peripheral route, we're using shortcuts and heuristics. However, when something means a lot to us and it's an expensive purchase, like a house or a car, I'm less likely going to decide to make that $2 difference based on a whim. Instead, I'll be doing considerable market research, considering different neighborhoods, looking at property values, and all of that would be a whole lot of rational argument, or not just taking shortcuts, but really doing the math to process it. When we're doing that, we're elaborating on the argument. And so that's a simple way to understand the difference between elaboration likelihood models of the central route, using rationality and mathematical processing, or using the peripheral route, finding yourself with quick heuristics and shortcuts that allow you to process messages. Now, while the peripheral route might sound like the less favorable, we use the peripheral route almost all the time to make up the regular decisions of our daily lives. Perhaps you see a cockroach and you quickly smash on it. Well, you perhaps didn't spend time thinking about the ethics and morality of that cockroach's life and consider sweeping it outside as an alternative. Instead, you acted with an ew, smash it mentality. And of course, that's okay in the context of a peripheral mode of thinking that we use almost all the time to make up daily decisions. Indeed, our life is just filled with too many constant decisions that must be made, so that peripheral route becomes helpful to us. As we think about elaboration likelihood modeling, much like the previous theory, social judgment theory, this theory also exists on a continuum. In this continuum, we have a central route, whereby individuals are more likely to want to process a message, and they're highly going to scrutinize that message, and if their opinions are changed, that change tends to be long-term change, compared to a shorter continuum, perhaps, that's characterized by those short clues or otherwise heuristic cues we might use, autopilot or default styles of thinking, and short-term changes that, if we think through a little bit more effectively, might actually be reversed when we go through that central route. And so as we talk about elaboration likelihood modeling, we're talking about the degree to which the audience or the individuals receiving a message are going to use the central route and want to process the message through logic and reasoning, or whether they're going to want to process a message through a peripheral route which relies on shortcuts and clues. In this context, researchers have found that people are more likely to use the central route if the message is highly relevant to them, includes a lot of motivating messages, and relates or concerns to their effects of pleasure. So, I think right now it's safe to say we're all doing a little bit of research about this COVID-19 outbreak. As we go through doing that research about this COVID-19 outbreak, we're likely processing it through the central route, trying to find the smartest, most intelligent information we can, reading that stuff because it is relevant to us, our friends, our families, as we live through it. There are considerable consequences as we all endure financial hardships and otherwise, and of course it threatens and risks or jeopardizes our ability to have the types of lifestyle and pleasure that we previously had. And so we're processing that through a central route. Otherwise, we might also use peripheral routes to make decisions about which weather channel we should watch. You're looking at the weather channel and one person has a character who seems more entertaining or more interesting, so you watch that one. That doesn't mean that they have better weather, it means that they had the more entertaining weather host, but perhaps that's not exactly what determines the qualities you're looking for in a central route. Again, these central and peripheral routes of processing. So to characterize the central route, we're talking about a route that includes rational arguments, a considerable amount of evidence, and if you accept the changes, it's more likely to create change. However, not everybody is able to process rational arguments. What are some reasons why? Well, the targets have to want to receive it. They have to be motivated. Perhaps you're walking by a kiosk in the mall and they're spitting facts at you. Who cares? He'll keep walking. You're not going to listen. Now, if they happen to mention a thing that you're interested in or you want to learn more about, you might stop, pause, and turn to listen to that salesperson. However, if they're not motivated, getting them through the central route is going to be unlikely. And secondly, the individuals have to be able to cognitively process the information. The central route requires a lot of thinking. All of you just completed a considerable amount of work on your recent case presentations. In doing that, you are going through the central route. You're reading Government Accountability Office reports, sophisticated high-level data from the Congressional Research Service. All of that is intensive and requires a considerable amount of intellectual labor. Not everybody has that capacity, and certainly not everybody has that time. And so, many times, we make decisions through the peripheral route. As we think about the peripheral route, we might think about some of the common clues or cues we often use to make decisions in our own life. Perhaps you take recommendations because 3 out of 4 doctors tell you so. Well, those are arguments by authority that otherwise persuade us through a peripheral route. Other times you might buy something because it says if you buy something, they'll give you a rebate in the future. Well, that makes a commitment to you to purchase now to get a response in the future. Third, sometimes you buy something because you see a distinction. It's this versus that. There's no other alternatives. Well, presumably there are. You're taking a peripheral route and a this versus that contrast. In some instances, we buy things simply because we like it or because the other individuals we know in our lives like it. In some cases, we buy something because there's a this for that, a reciprocity, a buy one, get one, and so it makes sense economically. Why wouldn't you? It's a buy one, get one. They're practically giving them away. Scarcity. If we don't buy it now, it will all run out. I think we're all enduring some peripheral cues about the scarcity of toilet paper and making perhaps irrational arguments when we buy up a whole bunch of it. We're certainly counting down the rolls in our home here. We'll see how that goes. Perhaps I'll keep us updated. I won't. Finally, social proof, or others are buying this, and so that's a cue that I should buy that as well. Of course, you can think about the way that all sorts of expert advice is used, or logos are designed with various different contrasts, and different types of celebrity endorsements are used to emphasize liking, or things like scarcity are emphasized during times of need, or peer pressure is used to create forms of social proof. All of these indicate that peripheral clues can be pretty effective and can actually make strong, neutral, or weak arguments. So in concluding a brief discussion of Elaboration Likelihood Model, we should think over how this theory helps us make predictions about the real world. Elaboration Likelihood Modeling tells us that if listeners are engaged and they want to know more, we should use the central route. And in using the central route, we should rely on well-crafted, fact-based messages which help us better structure the message. Because if we do use weak arguments or things that our audience already knows more than us about, it can actually backfire and make us look like fools, and they're like, I know more than this character, I'm not listening to anything else they say. And in that response, there can be some boomerang effect, as we described in social judgment theory. So persuaders who want to use the peripheral messages should be very careful to note that their messages don't guarantee any long-term change. The effects can often be very minimal, and they should be careful to avoid using things like logical fallacies or unethical appeals that might otherwise be dangerous and deceptive.